You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Welcome to the Human Capital Insights podcast from the Conference Board. This is the second episode of DEI-logue, Conversations on Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. We'll be featuring speakers from upcoming DEI conference and practitioners working in the field. I'm John Brewer, the Programme Director for the event, and today we're joined by Bryan Lee, Senior Director, Financial Services Industry at Salesforce. And we're here to talk about something that's been very much in the news lately, and that's the issue of anti-Asian racism. So, Bryan, thank you for joining us today.
John, great to be here with you. Thank you so much for that.
I thought I'd open just by asking you, as I mentioned, in my brief intro, anti-Asian racism is something that is obviously not a new thing, but it's something that's grabbed the headlines subsequent to the shootings in Atlanta. I just want to ask you, really, how your response to that, how you're doing, and your thoughts around that event, and how you and the sort of Asian community has responded.
Yes, thanks, John. It's been an incredibly difficult couple of weeks since the shooting happened. I think on the one hand, you can't help but just feel grief, right, in terms of the loss of life, really the senseless violence that really is at the heart of that. And to add on top of that, the 6 of the victims were Asian, and that had obviously something to do with their deaths, is deeply troubling. I will say as well, though, that it's sort of been building up for, I think, the whole time that we've been in a pandemic. There has been a lot of similar types of discussion going on about that in the media, since last year.
So how do you find that anti-Asian racism expresses itself? On the one hand, I hear a lot about this notion of the sort of model minority, but also violent attacks particularly on elderly Asians in the community. What kinds of things are you seeing that sort of, how does anti-Asian racism express itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it has a lot of different forms that we find. I think, in the past year, obviously what we're seeing is a lot more examples of people just being outwardly hostile, to Asians of all types. And unfortunately, the fact that they're targeting elderly Asians is deeply troubling. Clearly, these people had nothing to do with the virus arriving in the United States or other parts of the world. And for them to be scapegoated, for that, for the way that they look, or perhaps what people think they are, is really difficult to see. I think on another aspect, it's not unusual for Asians to be concerned about their role in American society. My family, for example, has been here for over 120 years, for example, yet it's not unusual for us to still be called out for looking different and for being what people may perceive as un-American. So I know that a lot of my colleagues, have had that built into their family structures for a long time, or their experience of living and being an American. And I think it's that type of thing that we're really trying to call an attention to today, and to find ways to have the right kinds of conversations that hopefully will let us take the next step forward as a society and set some of this type of bigotry and racism aside.
Yeah, there's certainly been an escalation in anti-Asian violence in the US, and obviously a lot of people are laying responsibility for that with the virus, and this association of the virus with China, some of the rhetoric, particularly coming out of the previous administration, phrases like Kung flu, the China virus, etc. But we're also seeing a lot of other, increased antagonism between the US and China around the treatment of Uyghurs, the situation in Hong Kong, South China Sea, etc. I'm based in Canada. We've got 2 Canadian citizens who are incarcerated and were recently tried. One of the trials where they have the trial for an afternoon, and they'll let you know the verdict when they get round to it. Kind of thing.
Right.
There's a lot of sort of that's particularly Chinese sort of news coming out. This sort of increased hours. Do you think that's? How can we sort of address that in a sense and make sure that doesn't create sort of anti-Asian feeling to compatriots here in the States?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, John. I kind of go back to this thought that, and it's true, I think, for any group that might be either identified or discriminated against or marginalized in some way. We have to separate, I believe, countries from individuals and people, right? So someone mentioned the other day that, for example, that well, we might believe that the Russian government was involved in espionage or doing damage to the American electoral system. The people of Russia did not do that, right? So I wouldn't go and target someone who was Russian here in the United States because we believe something was done, by their government, for example, or their spy agencies. Similar to China, right? It's not about what the Chinese people are doing. It's more about perhaps a policy or position that the Chinese government is taking. And I think that's where we've had some breakdown in terms of separation between, what a country or government is doing versus what people who either are in that country or from that country and immigrated to either your country or mine are really about, right? And I think that line has been blurred, in some ways broken over the last few years, in particular with some of the rhetoric that's gone on.
Yeah. So I want to just move on from that to look at, because obviously we've got this diversity conference coming up, and anti-Asian racism is going to be a topic we're going to be talking about. And I think one of the focuses there will be on how organizations can respond. And I know you work at Salesforce. Salesforce is a company that I think has made a strong part of its brand is a notion of social responsibility. And I know that you have a racial equality and justice task force, and you posted something on LinkedIn last week where they'd made a statement on anti-Asian racism. Could you talk a little bit about that and what Salesforce are doing specifically to address this issue?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes in the category of what we're hoping many companies will do, which is to sort of make their voices heard in terms of standing up to some of the things that are happening today. The Racial Equality and Justice Task Force that we started within the past year, given a lot of the violence that was happening towards Blacks and Latinx types of populations last year, and Asians as well, it's been focused on really trying to make sure that we're looking at all aspects of how we as a company are really helping to address inequality, but while also promoting the causes of diversity and inclusion. And it goes to a lot of different aspects in terms of the way our company operates and what we believe, our values to be. With respect to, the statement that we made, it was really about trying to shine a light on the level of hate that's present in society today, and to let people know that Salesforce as a company, stands up against that. We're willing to support organizations that are advocating in that way. That we're willing to go forward and work on legislation to outlaw or ban that type of discrimination and violence against any group of color, but in particular in this case, certainly anti-Asian kinds of actions. And I think it's been something that has been at the heart of Salesforce for a very long time. Certainly as an Asian, I'm heartened to see the focus on it right now. And we need companies like Salesforce, I believe, to really stand up and make their voices heard, because with that voice comes a lot of attention, and I think an ability to pull a lot of other people along into the discussion.
Because I noticed in the statement there were things both about sort of the internal workings of the company, the way in which they were supporting employees, and also externally, like ensuring that contracts are given to Asian-owned businesses and also other racialized groups.
Right. Yeah. The task force actually has organized their work around 4 parts or 4 sections, I should say. One is around people, another is around philanthropy, another is around purchasing, and the last category is around policy. So what we've done is to set up sort of a vision or mission for what we expect out of each of those categories, and then a set of actions that we're pursuing in order to be able to try to make progress in all of those areas. So, for example, in the people area, it's what maybe a lot of your members are also pursuing, what level of diversity and inclusion do we have in our workforce, in our leadership, in the practices that we put forth in terms of hiring and promotion, for example. In philanthropy, it's really about how can we as a company and our people contribute to really advancing some of the things that we hope to see in society, and in particular to address some of the inequalities that we've seen. In the purchasing area, which is the one you were touching on, it's really taking a good look at the way that we look at our different suppliers or the types of companies that we could be encouraging to be a part of our supply or purchasing environment, and to really dedicate a specific amount. In this case, we're going to be focused on driving $200 million of purchasing over the next couple of years. That is focused on either minority or Black-owned businesses that we want to have as a part of our supply chain, if you will. And then the last category is around policy. It's really about advocating for the kinds of policies at a legal level, at a governmental level that we believe would help to level the playing field and give the kinds of opportunities that we believe people of all races and genders require and are eligible for.
So let's maybe just focus a little bit on that, on the first area of sort of the way in which the company works internally, and I'm sure that subsequent to the events in Atlanta, you probably and one of the reasons I appreciate you taking the time to sort of share your thoughts with us today is you must have had a lot of people asking you the same sort of questions I'm asking you. What does it feel like? How do you respond? Mm-hmm. As a leader in an organization with a team, and like what advice did you give to leaders and managers to create an environment where specifically sort of Asian Americans can feel that they belong and to kind of get beyond this sort of the sort of anti-Asian feeling that some people seem to have?
I think we've had at work a couple of different things that I think have truly helped to really form the culture that we have, and some of the ways that we try to talk with each other inside the community about some of these topics. So we have a number of groups that actually are equality groups. So we have one for the Asia Pac population, the Black population, the Latinx. There's what we call a Faith Force group. So there's a whole variety of these equality groups that have been in place for some time now. They're employee-led, and the objective is to let them raise the types of topics that help either create awareness or education, but also provide a channel or a vehicle for that type of discussion to happen within the company. So I think that's one great way that companies could, foster the type of discussion that's very badly needed. I think we've had, in addition, some vehicles like equality circles, and these are either large or small gatherings of people that we try to bring together to let them speak in hopefully a safe space about the types of things that they're feeling, similar to the question that you asked me. But instead of it just being a one-on-one type of a discussion, it's a forum that allows multiple people to speak and many, many, many more people to hear that discussion and to start to find a way to make a connection with what those people are feeling, and to start to hopefully find some ways that they can have that type of interaction or discussion with people that are in their lives that might be of color or minority status.
Mm. And I'm assuming, and we actually had someone from your Faith Force speak at our event a couple of years ago, and a really interesting example of an ERG there. I'm assuming, that as the sort of events in Atlanta have sort of played out, and like I said, the media attention, that those groups have come out in support of the Asian community within Salesforce. You create a sense of mutual support and solidarity across those, right?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I think that's been key. And again, I think it's it's a follow-on to obviously what we saw with some of the social injustice and protests last summer, for example. So this dialogue has been in some different forms for us, obviously, over the past couple of years, but very heightened, I'd say, over the past year and obviously into this time now. I think what's interesting about this for the Asian population right now, John, is that the Asian population is not used to being in the spotlight. In fact, there's some things that some of us have been talking about where, I think as we grew up, our grandparents or even our parents encouraged us to keep your head down, don't cause trouble, don't call attention to yourself. And it in some ways fed sort of this model minority myth problem that we have now, because you were sort of encouraged not to take a stand or not to make your voice very loud. But yet that's what we need now. And I think that the generation of Asians that I'm seeing interacting with now, the younger generation, they are tired of not being understood or of being invisible. So I think this is a moment, particularly now, where we might have the opportunity to actually, cross over that tipping point and create a stage and a platform by which that generation can make their voices heard. And we can make that a part of the conscience of the country in terms of really the world that we aspire to have.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm sort of wondering about, as someone who's obviously not Asian, and when you think about Asian people, I think one of the sort of stereotypes that's probably most durable is one of sort of conformity, right? I'm thinking about, for everything where you sort of see these old films in China with everyone sort of wearing the same kind of the revolutionary gear that they had, and always, and this sort of sense of sort of a much less individualistic culture than we have in the West. I mean, so are we seeing a sort of you're saying there's sort of a generational shift that's happening there?
Yeah, I think that's probably one aspect of it. I think it's important to note that even the term Asian American actually didn't really exist until the 70s when I was growing up. And but it's also important to point out that it, as with many other groups, it's not monolithic, right? If you think about it,
yes,
right,
yes.
There are dozens of different parts of the diaspora, right, of what being an Asian in the world is like, much less what Asian in America looks like. I think a piece of what people don't understand, in particular, and why this model minority myth is exactly that, is that actually the Asian population in the United States has actually the greatest disparity in terms of wealth inequality of any group. So you have people that are doing very well, they're very prosperous, but you have a huge immigrant population that have come over in recent years, and the poverty and crime associated with that population is as significant as it is for any other population, right? So again, it's easy to say, well, again, Asians may be good at a certain thing, or we categorize them or have a belief that they're of a certain way or thinking, when actually, again, it's incredibly diverse, both
Yes.
Socioeconomically, by the different divisions of the areas of Asia that they came from, and for even the length of time that they've been in the United States, and really want to say that they're Americans. So.
Well, I don't think anyone can accuse racists of being nuanced in that regard, in any regard.
That's a great
but again, it's saying, I'm thinking about a post I saw on LinkedIn from someone who'd received a piece of email, a sort of semi-threatening piece of email. She's of Asian descent from presumably some white guy about what she was saying. And there was a reference in there, remember what happened to you in World War II, we'll get you again, kind of thing, a very sort of threatening thing. And of course, her response to that was, well, actually, I'm of Chinese descent, and we were on your side in World War II.
Right.
This sort of, again, this sort of tendency to sort of lump what is an incredibly diverse international group all into one.
And it works. It works the other way. Similar to that story, I think when I grew up in Detroit, as a younger man in Detroit, a friend of mine was in an altercation with a couple of laid-off auto workers who mistakenly took him for being Japanese, and he was Chinese. It had a tragic outcome. He was basically beaten to death with a baseball bat by these two men. So, just a tragedy in terms of what racist behavior really can take us to do or lead us to do. And so we have to confront it. One of the things I try to take some hope from that example was, it was probably one of the first times that both the Chinese and Japanese communities in Detroit actually mobilized and protested and raised their voices to say this was unjust and that we needed to bring some attention to that. Sadly, not that example is not widely remembered anymore, and many of my younger colleagues don't know that story, even to call upon. But either that aside, I believe now that we should be capitalizing on this opportunity to really make that a very pointed discussion, to have people, share their perspective and viewpoints, and really call attention to the injustice of this.
Right, because I remember when I came to North America in the early 90s, and there was certainly a lot of anti-Japanese feeling at that time. Because you mentioned these auto workers in this tragic incident, but it was the auto jobs that were going to Japan, so everything was like very anti-Japanese, and now it's sort of very anti-Chinese. But at the end of the day, people aren't distinguishing in fact between them. It's just Asian, right? So
right. Yeah, and again, I think in these times of stress and crisis, and for sure, the past year has been of incredible stress for everyone, right? In terms of worldwide, going through a pandemic like this. But I think it's easy to look for someone to blame, in these types of situations, right? But I think it's why leaders at the government level and society level, in corporate level, we have to work doubly hard or maybe triply hard to really call out that is not, a path that leads us to anywhere productive, as a society, right? And that the scapegoating or the trying to identify and target a particular group and call them out for blame leads us nowhere but to bad places.
Yeah, and I think it is what certainly happened over the past year does show unfortunately, the power of the words of leaders to influence people as well, which I think we need to be mindful of. Yeah.
But I think it leads me back to maybe, again, some of the topics I'm guessing, you'll talk about in May with your membership at the conference, is that I do believe that there's a very powerful role that corporations and companies can take today to really help stand up and call out what we need to be doing. I think our founder and CEO, chairman, Mark Benioff, has been a firm believer from the beginning, and particularly the last few years, that business actually can be a very, very powerful platform for change. And in fact, that it should take that mantle, and really try to run with that. And we're seeing a lot of, I think, positive ramifications from it. Right? If you look at some of the studies that are out there, and look at what employees are looking for in their companies, we're actually seeing a very favorable response for employees to want to take pride in what their company stands up for and what its values are and how it embodies those values and how it takes a stand and actions for things that they perceive to be wrong or unjust. So I think that, again, it's important that as corporate leaders are really plugging into that dynamic for our employees right now and recognizing that they expect to work for a company that cares about more than profits, right? That they care about the role in society and hopefully the positive impact that corporations and the business community at large can have on society.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think just to close here, I certainly think that Salesforce have demonstrated that leadership over the years, and I thank you for joining us today. And if the first step on the road to fixing these things is education and understanding, I really appreciate you sharing some of your story and the things that you're doing and your own response to what's been happening. And really appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
John, it's been a great opportunity, and I appreciate it. Best of luck with the conference. And these are incredibly important topics for our business community to take on. So I applaud your leadership in doing that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, thank you everyone. This has been Dialogue. Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you sign up for our Diversity and Inclusion virtual event. It'll be happening May 24th and 26th. And we'll certainly be including a discussion on anti-Asian racism in that event, as well as lots of other discussions on various aspects of equity and inclusion. Thank you all. Goodbye.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.